The Galactic Empire's envoy lounged in his hovering chair, exuding the same smug superiority that had defined every alien race that had challenged Earth's place in the stars. His reptilian features barely moved as he spoke, his tone clipped and bored, as if the meeting were a formality before an inevitable surrender. "This negotiation is pointless," he sighed. "Your kind clings to ancient, ineffective weaponry. Kinetic projectiles, combustion-based firearms, how quaint. The Empire's energy-based arsenal renders them obsolete. You may as well throw stones." Across the war table, General Rebecca Halstead remained unreadable, her gloved hands resting atop a polished steel surface, reflecting the sterile glow of the Imperial warship's lighting. Around her, the hand-picked team of American military officers and operatives remained equally impassive. Colonel Briggs, his square jaw set in silent defiance, exchanged a glance with Major Carter, who had long since mastered the art of restrained amusement in the presence of alien arrogance. Halstead exhaled slowly, tilting her head. "Obsolete? Funny. From what I've seen, your so-called invincible army hasn't fought a real war in centuries. You crush the weak and call it conquest." The envoy scoffed, his elongated fingers drumming against the holographic interface before him. "Humanity is an anomaly, stubborn, reckless. You refuse progress." His slitted eyes narrowed. "That will not save you. The Empire does not tolerate defiance." Behind Halstead, Lieutenant Ramirez gave the slightest shake of his head, resisting the urge to laugh. They had heard all this before, countless alien empires, all convinced of their own invulnerability. They all made the same mistake. The holographic projection above the table shifted, displaying a simulated battle scenario. It depicted Earth's defenses pitted against the Empire's forces in a calculated massacre. Drones disabled within seconds, energy shields rendered useless, automated defenses shut down before they could fire a shot. "We give you one opportunity," the envoy continued, his voice turning grave. "Surrender your outdated arsenal, accept Imperial governance, and be allowed to serve. Refuse, and we will bring the full weight of our war machine upon you." Halstead leaned forward, meeting his gaze with something far colder than defiance, certainty. "Run your little simulations all you want," she said, voice even. "They don't account for us." The envoy's jaw tightened, flicking his clawed hand toward the side doors. They hissed open, revealing a column of Imperial soldiers in gleaming armor, their pulse rifles slung across their backs. Their mere presence was meant as a final intimidation tactic. Halstead rose to her feet, her officers following in unison. She adjusted the cuffs of her uniform, her insignia catching the sterile light. "We've seen what we need to see. If this is your best offer, we have nothing else to discuss." The envoy's lip curled. "Then prepare for annihilation." She offered a cold smile. "You first." The first strike came faster than expected. Imperial forces descended upon Outpost Theta, a critical research base on the edge of human-controlled space. The attack was meant to be a demonstration, a surgical eradication. By the time Halstead and her team arrived, the wreckage of automated defenses and disabled energy weapons littered the barren terrain. The Empire hadn't wasted time. Their assault had been swift, overwhelming, and brutally efficient. Briggs surveyed the destruction through the thick dust hanging in the air. "Looks like they hit everything electronic first." His voice was steady, but the underlying tension was unmistakable. Ramirez crouched beside a charred defense turret, running a gloved hand over the scorched metal. EMP-based suppression, followed by direct energy bombardment. Classic Imperial doctrine. Halstead stood at the center of the ruined battlefield, eyes scanning the wreckage with surgical precision. "They want us to fight on their terms." Carter smirked. "Then we make damn sure we don't." They moved quickly, working their way into what remained of the command bunker. Inside, a skeleton crew of surviving personnel had taken refuge, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and relief at the sight of the reinforcements. Captain Michaels, still wearing a bloodstained bandage around his arm, greeted them with a grim nod. They came in fast, he reported. We barely had time to react before our systems went dark. We lost comms, automated defenses, everything. Halstead motioned for Briggs to deploy the remaining squads while she studied the tactical map, projected on a cracked terminal. The Empire had left nothing to chance. They had disabled every piece of modern technology, ensuring humanity's vaunted advancements never came into play. That, of course, was their mistake. She turned to her officers. We've been too reliant on tech. We leaned into the conveniences of automation, of energy-based warfare, because we thought it put us on even ground. Her voice was firm, calculated. That ends now. Briggs folded his arms. Then what's the play? Halstead glanced toward the supply crates stacked in the corner of the bunker, stamped with the insignia of an era long past. Weapons no one had considered using for decades, relics of a time before humanity had reached for the stars. She ran a hand over the nearest crate, prying it open. Within, rows of meticulously maintained firearms gleamed under the dim lighting. She lifted a belt-fed machine gun, its weight grounding real. We stopped playing by their rules, she said. We go old school. Silence hung heavy for a moment before Ramirez let out a low whistle. You really think these'll work against the Empire's gear? Halstead slid a fresh belt of ammunition into place, testing the weapon's grip. She met his gaze without hesitation. I know they will. There was no more discussion. Orders were given, supply caches unlocked, and soldiers armed themselves with weapons they had only seen in history books. M2 Brownings, M240S, .50 caliber sniper rifles, all considered archaic, all about to become the deadliest tools on the battlefield. Outside, the dust had barely settled from the initial assault when the unmistakable hum of Imperial warships began to fill the sky once more. Halstead took her place at the front of her men, her machine gun resting against her hip. She glanced skyward as the first enemy dropships descended, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of her lips. They had come expecting surrender. They were about to learn what war really looked like. The first dropships landed with mechanical precision, their sleek, silver hulls gleaming under the dust-choked light. The Empire, ever confident in its superiority, did not rush. They deployed their troops with calculated efficiency, boots hitting the ground in perfect synchrony, weapons drawn in casual readiness. These soldiers had conquered 1,000 worlds without struggle. Their doctrine relied on overwhelming force and technological supremacy. Against any other species, it was enough. The Americans watched in silence, their weapons primed, their fingers steady against cold steel. They saw no hesitation in the enemy's ranks, no concern in the rhythmic clanking of their exo-armored boots. The Imperials believed the battle was already won, that human resistance would be swept aside, like every civilization before them. It was a belief that would cost them dearly. The first burst of gunfire shattered the stillness, a deafening roar that tore through the air like thunder. The heavy machine guns kicked back against their operators, spitting lead at blistering speeds. Unlike energy weapons, which required time to charge and dissipated against adaptive shielding, kinetic rounds ignored all such limitations. The .50 caliber slugs punched through the Imperial's armor as if it were paper, shattering helmets, ripping through flesh, and sending bodies sprawling into the dirt. The Empire's forces hesitated. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a flicker of disbelief, a pause in the seamless execution of their advance. They had expected futile resistance, outdated weapons that posed no threat. Instead, their front line was reduced to a mess of torn bodies and mangled metal within seconds. General Halstead did not hesitate. She had no use for speeches, no need for theatrics. War was movement, and hesitation was death. She pivoted, her machine gun braced against her shoulder, cutting down an advancing unit with ruthless efficiency. The weapon roared in her hands, brass casings cascading onto the blood-soaked ground. Her soldiers followed suit, their rifles and machine guns tearing through the second wave before it had a chance to recover. The Imperials scrambled to adapt. Their commanders barked orders in their guttural tongue, their exosuits adjusting for heavier resistance. They fired back, lances of blue energy streaking across the battlefield. But the humans were no longer standing still. They moved between cover, ducking low, firing in disciplined bursts. The Imperials had never fought an enemy that moved like this, that adapted without hesitation. Briggs took down a cluster of enemy officers, their bodies crumpling under a relentless hail of lead. Ramirez worked his sniper rifle with surgical precision, each shot dropping an Imperial before they could react. Carter led a fire team through the wreckage, flanking the enemy with brutal efficiency. The Imperials fought back, but for the first time in living memory, they were losing ground. The Empire's forces had never considered the possibility of failure. Their battle plans accounted for energy-based warfare, for technological superiority, for species that relied on shields and plasma weaponry. But none of that mattered now. Their armor, designed to withstand directed energy blasts, offered no protection against kinetic impact. Their tactical formations, built around energy suppression, were meaningless against the relentless, unyielding hail of bullets tearing through their ranks. Panic began to spread. The Imperials, once an unstoppable force, faltered. Their movements grew erratic, their once perfect formations breaking apart as they attempted to regroup. They had no countermeasure, no protocol for an enemy that did not play by their rules. They had expected another weak, compliant species. Instead, they had awoken something ruthless, something relentless. Halstead pressed forward, her machine gun never still, her movements precise and unyielding. She saw the fear creeping into the enemy's ranks, the uncertainty flickering in their alien eyes. It was a sight she had seen before, in every war humanity had fought, in every empire that had underestimated them. The Imperials, for all their arrogance, were just another in a long line of conquerors who had mistaken human resilience for weakness. They tried to retreat. The order came through their communication channels, hurried and frantic, a desperate bid to reorganize. Dropships powered up, their engines flaring to life, their troops scrambling to fall back. But Halstead had anticipated this. Her forces were already repositioning, cutting off escape routes, turning what should have been a tactical withdrawal into a slaughter. The machine guns did not stop. The rifles did not cease. The Imperials, who had never known true war, who had never faced an enemy that fought without mercy, were given no quarter. The battlefield became a graveyard, bodies littering the dirt, their once gleaming armor now torn and useless. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The last dropship, its hull riddled with bullet holes, managed to escape into the atmosphere, trailing smoke as it fled back to the Empire's fleet. The battlefield fell silent, save for the distant crackling of flames and the slow, steady breath of the victors. Halstead stood amid the wreckage, her weapons still warm in her hands. Her officers gathered around her, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat, their expressions grim but satisfied. Briggs exhaled, shaking his head. They never saw it coming. Ramirez kicked at a fallen Imperial, watching as its shattered helmet rolled away. They thought they had it all figured out. Thought we'd just roll over. He glanced at Halstead. What's next? She wiped the dust from her weapon, her gaze never leaving the horizon. The battle was won, but the war had just begun. The Empire would not take this humiliation lightly. They would return, with greater numbers, with deadlier weapons, with a vengeance they had never needed before. But that no longer mattered. The moment the first Imperial soldier had fallen, the moment their flawless doctrine had crumbled under the weight of human adaptability, the war had already shifted. The Empire, for the first time in its long history, had encountered something it could not control. Halstead met the eyes of each of her men, her voice steady, unwavering. We don't stop. There was no need for anything more. The message was clear. The Imperials had come expecting an easy conquest. They had found something else entirely. The humans had drawn blood, and they were just getting started. The wreckage of the battlefield was still smoldering when the first Imperial reinforcements arrived. The distant hum of their engines was low at first, a barely perceptible tremor in the air, but soon it grew into a deafening roar as wave after wave of dropped ships descended from the blackened sky. Unlike before, there was no arrogant posturing, no slow, methodical deployment. This time, the Empire moved with cold, calculating efficiency. They had underestimated the humans once. It would not happen again. Halstead stood motionless, watching as the enemy repositioned with practiced discipline. The surviving Imperials from the first battle had sent a clear message back to their commanders. This was no ordinary resistance. Their enemy was not weak, nor primitive, nor afraid. And now, the Empire was angry. Briggs shifted beside her, adjusting the ammunition belt across his chest. They're not playing around anymore. Ramirez scanned the advancing forces through his scope, his voice tight. Exosuits. Heavy armor. Those aren't regular foot soldiers. Carter loaded a fresh magazine into his rifle, his face expressionless. They brought the real warfighters this time. The Imperials advanced in seamless formations, their energy shields shimmering as they activated in unison. These were no longer the overconfident conscripts who had fallen so easily before. These were seasoned warriors, bred for conquest, honed by centuries of planetary subjugation. Their weapons, once held lazily, were now locked with precision, their barrels scanning for targets with mechanical discipline. They had adapted. Halstead did not waver. Adaptation was not exclusive to the Empire. The first engagement had been a test, a clash of arrogance against experience. But this was different. This was war. Her forces had spent every moment since the first battle reinforcing their positions, digging in where necessary, repositioning weapon emplacements, scavenging anything of use from the fallen Imperials. They had no energy shields, no sophisticated battle algorithms. What they had was firepower, grit, and an unwavering refusal to be conquered. The first barrage of enemy fire came like a tidal wave, a relentless downpour of plasma bolts and concentrated artillery strikes. The ground erupted in bursts of molten earth as the Imperial bombardment carved deep craters into the battlefield. The Americans did not panic. They had prepared for this. They moved fast, shifting between cover, suppressing the advancing troops with disciplined bursts of gunfire. The Empire had refined its tactics. They no longer marched headlong into the kill zone. Instead, they moved in staggered formations, using their shields to absorb incoming fire, while their sharpshooters targeted human positions with pinpoint accuracy. It was a strategy that should have worked, but Halstead had planned for this. Her soldiers knew that standing still meant death. They moved unpredictably, never lingering in one place long enough for enemy snipers to get a lock. They used the terrain to their advantage, baiting the Imperials into overextending, then cutting them down with overwhelming firepower. The heavy machine guns thundered, their barrels glowing red-hot as they spat death at the advancing forces. The Imperials had improved their armor, but it did not matter. The raw kinetic force of each .50 caliber round slammed into them with devastating impact, ripping through shields, shattering reinforced plating, tearing limbs from bodies. The once methodical advance faltered. Briggs took point, his squad covering him as he moved between cover, throwing a precisely timed explosive charge into the heart of an Imperial cluster. The detonation sent bodies flying, their shattered forms crashing into the dirt. Ramirez provided covering fire, his rifle never missing its mark. Carter led a flanking maneuver, striking at the enemy's exposed side, forcing them into retreat. Yet the Imperials did not break. Unlike the first wave, these soldiers did not panic. They reformed, adjusting their strategy mid-battle, countering human movements with chilling efficiency. Their heavy artillery locked onto fortified positions, sending shock waves through the earth with each impact. They deployed suppression drones, automated turrets that rained fire from above. They had learned, and so had the Americans. Halstead barked orders, her voice cutting through the chaos. A well-timed EMP blast sent the enemy drones spiraling out of the sky, crashing uselessly into the dirt. Her troops adjusted their firing patterns, targeting weak points in the enemy's armor, joints, visors, exposed power cores. They exploited every mistake, every minor miscalculation. The battle raged for what felt like hours, both sides refusing to yield. The ground was littered with bodies, human and imperial alike. Smoke filled the air, the acrid scent of burning metal mingling with the iron tang of blood. The Empire had sent its finest, but they had never fought an enemy like this. And then the shift happened. Halstead caught the flicker of hesitation in the enemy ranks, the briefest sign of uncertainty. The Imperials were relentless, but they were not invincible. They had never fought an enemy that refused to break, that adapted as fast as they did, that fought with the kind of savage, unrelenting determination that defined humanity. She seized the moment. With a sharp command, she signaled her forces to press forward. The Americans did not just hold the line, they advanced. Step by step, they pushed the Imperials back, cutting through their formations with disciplined, brutal efficiency. The machine guns did not stop. The rifles did not waver. The Empire's elite, their finest soldiers, their most advanced warriors, fell before the onslaught. And then, like before, they broke. It was not immediate. There was no single moment of collapse. But the retreat was undeniable. The once unshakable Imperials began to fall back, their once coordinated movements unraveling. Their commanders barked orders, trying to regain control, but it was too late. The humans pressed harder, faster, pushing them into a full retreat. Briggs exhaled, his hands steady despite the carnage around him. They don't know how to handle this. Ramirez reloaded, scanning the battlefield with cold calculation. They thought they could just overpower us. Carter adjusted his gear, his expression unreadable. They're learning, but so are we. Halstead surveyed the battlefield, her weapons still primed. The Empire had come back stronger, more prepared, more ruthless. And yet, it had not been enough. The war was far from over. The next wave would come, and the one after that. The Empire would not accept defeat. But they had suffered something they had never faced before. A true fight. She knew what came next. The Imperials would not stop. They would escalate. They would bring their deadliest weapons, their most advanced technology. They would unleash hell. But that was fine. She welcomed it. Because humans did not fear war. They mastered it. The silence after the battle was unnatural, thick with the weight of everything that had transpired. The ground was scarred, bodies scattered in broken heaps, the acrid scent of charred metal lingering in the air. What remained of the Imperial forces had retreated, but the war was far from won. Halstead knew that much. Victory in a single engagement meant nothing against an empire that spanned thousands of worlds. The real test was still ahead. A distant rumble broke the uneasy quiet, the low hum of engines growing louder. They were coming back, but this was different. There was no reckless charge, no immediate bombardment. The Imperials had learned. Again. And that made them dangerous. Halstead didn't waste time. She called her men together, their faces streaked with sweat and soot, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. There was no need for a speech. They all knew what was at stake. The Empire had underestimated them once, and then again. This time, they would throw everything they had at them. This time, they would not simply test humanity's strength. They would attempt to break it. Briggs slung a fresh belt of ammunition over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. They're going to send the big guns. Ramirez adjusted his rifle scope, scanning the distant ridgeline. We don't have the luxury of waiting to see what's coming. Carter wiped blood from his cheek, most of it not his own. They'll overrun us if we hold this position too long. Halstead understood the reality of the situation. The Imperials had resources beyond comprehension. They could keep sending waves of reinforcements, grinding down any resistance through sheer attrition. But that wasn't their way. No, if the Empire had learned anything from the last battle, it was that humans would not be crushed through brute force alone. The next attack would be calculated, precise, designed not just to kill, but to demoralize. The sky darkened as Imperial warships descended, their massive hulls blotting out the faint glow of the stars. Their strategy had shifted. No more reckless infantry charges. No more inefficient tactics. This time, they meant to annihilate everything in their path. The first blasts rained down from above, scorching the earth, sending shockwaves through the already battered landscape. Buildings crumbled. Defensive positions were reduced to rubble. Fire consumed what little remained of the once thriving colony. And yet the humans endured. Halstead and her men moved with lethal efficiency, dodging through debris, repositioning before the enemy could fully lock onto their locations. The Imperials had superior firepower, but that meant nothing if they couldn't hit their targets. And for all their advancements, for all their tactical adjustments, they still didn't understand what they were facing. The next wave of soldiers deployed in perfect synchronization, exo-armored elites descending with mechanical precision. Their weapons hummed with a deadly energy, plasma rifles locking onto heat signatures, adaptive shields forming a near-impenetrable line. They weren't just here to fight. They were here to make a statement. Halstead made one of her own. The machine guns opened fire before the Imperials could fully establish their foothold. .50 caliber rounds tearing through the night. Shields flared, bodies staggered, and in that brief moment of hesitation, the Americans pressed forward. This wasn't about holding the line anymore. It was about dismantling the enemy piece by piece, exploiting every weakness, striking where it hurt the most. Briggs led the charge, a relentless force of nature, cutting through enemy lines with brutal precision. Ramirez moved like a ghost, his shots finding gaps in armor, each round a death sentence. Carter provided covering fire, coordinating movements with sharp, calculated efficiency. There was no hesitation, no fear, only action. The Imperials fought back harder than ever. Their tactics adapted in real time, their formation shifting, counters executed with ruthless efficiency. They weren't just reacting, they were evolving, matching human aggression with their own relentless assault. They thought they could match the ferocity of mankind. They were wrong. One by one, their formations crumbled. Their armor, designed to withstand energy-based weapons, failed against the sheer kinetic force of human munitions. Their shields flickered and collapsed under sustained fire. Their soldiers, conditioned to believe in their own superiority, hesitated when confronted with an enemy that refused to break. And then the final blow came. A thunderous explosion ripped through the battlefield, a final desperate gambit by the Empire to regain control. But it wasn't enough. As the dust settled, as the smoke cleared, the truth became undeniable. The Imperials, for all their advancements, for all their arrogance, had failed. Halstead stood among the wreckage, her weapon still raised, her expression unreadable. The war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The Empire would return, stronger, more determined, more ruthless. But that didn't matter, because humanity had already proven the one truth the Imperials had refused to accept. They were not the dominant force in the galaxy. They were not invincible. And they had just learned, in the most brutal way possible, that humans, especially Americans, did not lose.